How's it going, YouTube? Comments in today with another video. And today, guys, the video is going to be where to hand trap. And I do hope that you enjoyed today's video right before Nationals because there's going to be a lot to talk about. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over on Gem, Cloud, Arla, Imperium, Dragonshield, RW, MainPhaze, and Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so. And then also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so we can hit our goal at 30,000. Now let's hop right on into our first slide here about Azamina Light and Darkness. Now, this deck is pretty crazy, but the one thing that you should know is that the Light and Darkness ritual is a one-of, so if your opponent tries to add it back from grave, you can just DD Crow it, and then your opponent doesn't get to add back either card. Yes, they can still add this back to their deck with the Score Archfiend, but they still have to get back to it, which can make things fairly awkward. The other thing that's really popular in this deck right now is the Protect Kotalker line, which can get beat by most hand traps, so you really want to keep that in mind that it's not the craziest combo. And this is where Nibiru can even be pretty okay, but it just depends on if they are going for this line or not. You can stop it very early or very late. If you want to wait until they actually are reborning with the Charmer and just DD Crow out the Spell Cancer or the Pharaonic Advent, you definitely can do that. If you have to stop it earlier due to some kind of negation being a threat, you can always DD Crow out the Protect Kotalker or Bellet. And even further back, if you really wanted to, the way that you can reborn the Protect Kotalker is by banishing a Link 1. So you can actually just like Bestial or DD Crow the Link 1 out of the graveyard, because at that point they can't bring back the Protect code, and that's a lot of Link rating that they're missing out on. A lot of times they get to this Anima or a Link Rebo because they're able to resolve the Destruction to Surge Souls, so you can Valor Imperm the Destruction, which is pretty good. I still like stopping the Diabell Star, especially if it's your only hand trap, because you don't want your opponent to get to Deception, because not only is that going to be a free draw for them from the Wanted, but it's also going to be a negation that's hitting the board, so you want to stop everything that you can as soon as possible. Yes, your opponent could still get to things like Spell Cancer or the Pharaonic Advent post side, but if you only have one hand trap anyways, you just want to make your odds of winning as good as possible. You could also unironically Ogre the Diabell Star so your opponent can't get to something like the Destruction, but you want to keep it simple with the Valor Imperm onto Diabell Star or the Destruction. If you're going to be ogring anything, you should ogre the Deception or the Mind Shuffle. You can't do it on Mind Shuffle activation because they'll set it with Griffo and then activate it on activation, so you can't just like ogre it. But if you're playing against a standard variant, they'll pop it, add it back, and then Pharah it, so you can never respond to it. So it's really bad to ogre this against the standard variant, unless they're just like not doing that line. But you can usually ogre the Mind Shuffle when they go to return something for cost, and then clear this so they can't summon a ritual on you, which is also really strong. Now, the last spot here is going to be Ash, which is heavily going to depend first, second, pre, post side. Depends on where you want to throw this. It's either going to be on your own turn if they're trying to play on your turn. You just want to Ash Mind Shuffle. And then even to that same effect, you still want to Ash Mind Shuffle. But like if your opponent goes Deception, and again, you have like one hand trap and they tribute something, you kind of have to Ash it, right? Because otherwise you're getting no value for your cards. So that's something that's really important, and you really want to keep that in mind, because otherwise you're going to be in a really rough position where you could have like another really good breaker, but they have a negate now, and you can't really do much about that because you didn't stop it early enough. And then lastly, if you open like Ash Bell and they start Wanted, I would even consider just belling the Wanted poster to try to stop the line altogether. Things that change into the Mitsurugi variant: you just Valor Imperming onto the Celtic Sage, you're going to Ash the Saji after it's been tributed from the Habikiri effect, and then you can also DD Crow the Mitsurugi rituals when they're tributed for cost. Usually it's going to be Mirakumo. Sometimes you can catch your opponent when they're trying to just go for like the Futsu line and just banish the Futsu, so keep that in mind. As for the standard variant, you can hit the Celtic, but usually you're just hitting the Whalebaz, because this is how you're going to be able to bridge into your Light and Darkness engine, especially if you don't already have it. Now for Ryzeal Blitzclique, the Typhoon tech is actually really strong against this deck. It's just really good. But the number one way that you kill this deck is honestly cutting off access to the field spell, whether you're ashing the alternator after they send it to the grave with the Foolish Burial Goods to be able to search the field spell, or you're just like ogring the field spell or ashing the field spell. This is all going to be extremely important in beating this deck, especially the fact that it's someone's token and searches. You can hit it with either, which is really good. Now, you can also DD Crow or Bell the breakaway from coming back because you don't want this to be back on the board. Very good interruption. It also does a lot for the deck. And then lastly, you just want to hit the first Ryzeal name mostly that comes out, because you want to cut your opponent off of being able to get the detonator. This deck can throw a lot of bodies on board, and they usually want hideout instead of something like cross, so they don't put up cross. So that's where Nibiru can randomly be good against this matchup. It's usually never a Fua against the matchup, it's usually just Perulia. As for Invoked, it's usually going to be the Fiendsmith variant, so you want a Nibiru on the Necroquip Engraver, just so your opponent can't get the Caesar, or just like Bell or Crow the Engraver, of course, so your opponent doesn't get to these lines. But the number one way to stop this deck is going to be Valor Imperm onto the Invoked Fire Fusion here, the Baron. This card is very strong. Being able to add the main deck Negate, which is also going to get them back to Sword, because your opponent is going to use Sword, and then use Sword's effect to be able to put it back in deck, and then use the main deck Negate to be able to reset Sword, and resetting Sword is going to be the scariest thing that your opponent can do because this card is very good. So you want to make sure that when your opponent tries to bring this back to their deck, you just DD Crow it. It's usually just a one of, so your opponent doesn't have access to this, but Valor Imperm has to go onto the Baron. It is your best bet. And then also just Ash onto the Divine Spirit so your opponent doesn't get to other Alistair monsters. Small refresher course on Dracotail Branded, of course hitting Walbaz, or Ogre onto the Dark Dragon or the Fallen of Albaz. If your opponent is threatening your board with their fusion, just go ahead and Ogre the Fallen of Albaz. If your opponent is trying to combo, hit the Dark Dragon. Now, Rahu is much better than Branded Fusion. You want to Ash this, but if your opponent leads Branded High Spirits, I'm just Ashing that instead. If you have Ash or Bell and you're really afraid of Flame or Sting, you can always wait for those. But hitting Flame or Sting is going to be really effective, especially if you just have like a Bell, and then hitting the Urgula target with DD Crow, so the Urgula will still go back, and then the target will get banished, and your opponent gets no value. As for the Train FTK, this is pretty simple in stopping. The Blue Traveler is going to get hit with DD Crow or Bell. This is going to be a very crucial hit for the deck. You can also Ash the Brutal Dozer, and then if your opponent is starting, and then they activate Exceptional Schedule, and then give you a token, and then go Urgent Schedule, you just want to Ash that instead if they lead that way. But if your opponent goes through the other line where they're going for like the Brutal Dozer, you're just Ash Valor Imperming the Brutal Dozer. If you have an additional negate, you can just go ahead and go after the Ballista, because it's also going to be a lot of value in that. But then last but not least is just ogring the Revolving Switchyard. You can also Nibiru this deck pretty well. So this is where I'm saying like Nibiru can be a pretty big sleeper right now, because this card actually comes up in a lot of very random moments right now, and no one's prepared for it. Now, as for Fairy Tail, I can't make it more obvious, everyone. I cannot make it more obvious. Hit the Wicket. I cannot make it more obvious. I can't stand when I look at people's hands and they just have like a Valor and Imperm and Ash, and I'm just sitting there watching a match and I'm just like, really? You know, just like, it's so easy. Just hit the Wicket. And if you can't hit the Wicket, DD Crow, the Tails, Bell, the Matchgiru. Don't let your opponent extend. If they activate Tails in the grave and then they use it on field, Ogre it. There's so many ways that you can hit this deck, but the two most important ways is banishing the Tails from the grave and hitting Wicket. I promise you, you'll be okay. I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, definitely go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you all at Nationals.